Angela was driving home late in the evening. The city was quiet, and the streets were not too busy. She had finished a long day at work and was looking forward to resting. The soft hum of her car engine was the only sound inside the vehicle, and she thought about the small things she had to do when she reached home: heat some food, call her sister, and prepare for tomorrow's cases at the courthouse. Angela lived a life of discipline, but also of quiet dignity. She had worked very hard to reach where she was. As she drove through an intersection, she noticed a police car following her. At first, she did not think much about it. Police cars patrolled the area often, and it was normal to see them late at night. But after a few minutes, she realized that the car was still behind her, matching her every turn. She kept calm and followed every traffic rule. She signaled, stopped at lights, and drove well within the speed limit. Then the blue and red lights flashed. The siren gave a short wail. Angela pulled over immediately, her heart sinking just a little. She wondered what reason the officers had for stopping her. She knew her car registration was valid, her license was in order, and she had not broken any law. Still, she rolled down her window and placed both hands on the wheel, calm and steady. Two officers stepped out of the patrol car. They walked toward her vehicle slowly, one on each side. Angela could already sense their tone before they spoke. Something about the way they looked at her, suspicious, firm, as if they had already judged her, made her uneasy. The officer on her left leaned down and asked for her license and registration. Angela greeted him politely and handed the documents over. Her voice was calm, her eyes steady. The officer frowned as if her confidence annoyed him. He asked her why she was out so late at night. Angela explained that she was driving home from work. She did not say where she worked. She simply answered the question honestly. The second officer, standing by the passenger side, shone his flashlight into her car. He looked around as though expecting to find something wrong. When he found nothing unusual, he stepped back, but his eyes lingered on Angela in a way that was not friendly. Angela returned home in the early hours of the morning after being released from the police station. The night had been long and exhausting, but her mind was not tired. She moved around her home quietly, her thoughts heavy yet controlled. She placed her bag on the table, poured herself a glass of water, and sat in silence. The arrest was still fresh in her memory: the flashing lights, the firm grip on her wrists, the smirks on the officers' faces. She replayed it all in her head, not out of anger but out of reflection. The next day of the hearing, the final day of the hearing, arrived with even more anticipation than before. The courthouse was full, every seat taken, and people even stood along the walls. Journalists, community leaders, lawyers, and ordinary citizens came to witness what had become more than just a court case. It had become a symbol. People wanted to see how justice would be served when those who enforced the law had misused their power. Angela prepared as she always did. She woke early, reviewed the documents, and reminded herself that her duty was not to punish but to uphold fairness. She put on her robe, the robe she had worn countless times before, and walked into the courthouse with the same calm grace. To her, this was not about personal victory. It was about showing that dignity and truth could stand taller than arrogance and abuse. When she entered the courtroom, the crowd rose. The officers were already seated. They looked different now: defeated, tired, their confidence completely gone. Their uniforms no longer seemed like shields of power. Instead, they looked like reminders of responsibility they had failed to honor. The proceedings began with a quiet seriousness. Angela recapped the evidence, the false claims in the report, the body cam footage that told a different story, the witness statements that matched the truth. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture: an arrest without cause, actions driven not by law but by bias and assumption. The officers sat still, their eyes down. They had no more words to defend themselves. The evidence had spoken louder than anything they could say. Angela paused for a moment before speaking further. The room was silent, every ear waiting for her words. She looked across the courtroom, her gaze steady, her voice calm but firm. "This court has heard the evidence," she began. "We have seen how authority was used not to serve the law, but to control without cause. We have heard the words spoken that night, and we have watched the actions taken. Justice is not served when those entrusted with power use it unfairly. Justice is not served when trust is broken by those sworn to protect it." Her words were measured, not loud, but they carried a weight that filled the room. She continued, "Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves fairness. The law is not a weapon for intimidation, it is a shield for truth. When that shield is broken, the community suffers. And when the community suffers, the very foundation of justice is shaken." The crowd listened, some nodding, some wiping away quiet tears. For many, her words spoke to more than this single case. They spoke to years of experiences, to struggles faced in silence. Angela turned her attention directly to the officers. "You were given responsibility. You were given the trust of the people. But instead of protecting, you chose to act on assumptions. Instead of upholding the law, you chose to misuse it. The evidence leaves no doubt. Your actions were not only wrong, they were unjust." The officers shifted in their seats, their faces pale. They could not meet her eyes. Angela then delivered her ruling. "This court finds you guilty of misconduct, abuse of authority, and violation of the rights of the citizen you arrested. You will face disciplinary measures, loss of position, and further review by the appropriate authorities. Your actions have consequences. This court cannot erase the harm caused, but it can ensure that such actions are not ignored." The words fell like a heavy stone into the silence. The room remained still for a moment, then a low wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Some faces showed relief, others respect. A few people clasped their hands together, as if in prayer, grateful to see fairness delivered openly. Angela did not smile. She did not celebrate. Her expression remained calm, professional, and steady. She had delivered justice, nothing more, nothing less. The officers were led out quietly, their heads low. The crowd watched them go, the same men who had once carried themselves with arrogance now humbled before the law they had misused. After the session ended, people gathered outside the courthouse. Some spoke about how remarkable the case had been. Others said it gave them hope. The story spread quickly beyond the courthouse walls, carried into the streets, the news, and the community at large. It became a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, could still shine clearly. Angela returned to her chambers, closing the door softly behind her. She sat for a moment, reflecting. The journey from the night of her arrest to this ruling had been long and difficult, but she had never once allowed herself to lose control. She had not shouted, she had not sought revenge, and she had not let anger cloud her actions. She had chosen dignity at every step, and in doing so, she had shown the true strength of justice. Later that evening, Angela left the courthouse and walked home through the quiet streets. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. She breathed deeply, feeling a calmness settle over her. She thought about her parents and how they had raised her to believe in fairness. She thought about the countless hours she had studied to become a judge. She thought about the night she had been handcuffed, standing on the roadside, treated without dignity. And she thought about how patience and truth had carried her through. At home, she placed her robe neatly in her closet. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at her desk. On the desk were letters from people she had helped in past cases, thank you notes, words of gratitude, reminders that her work mattered. She read a few of them, her heart steady. Angela knew that her story was not just about her. It was about every person who had been treated unfairly, every person who felt powerless in the face of authority. She hoped her example would remind others that strength was not always loud, that dignity could be more powerful than anger, and that truth had a way of revealing itself if one held steady. The officers would face the consequences of their actions, but Angela did not dwell on them. She thought instead about the future, about how important it was to keep the light of fairness alive. Her case was one example, but the work of justice was never finished. There would always be more battles to fight, more truths to protect, more dignity to uphold. As the night grew quiet, Angela looked out her window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were still struggling, still hoping for fairness. And she knew her role was to continue serving them with integrity. Her story was not about revenge. It was about justice. It was about showing that even when treated unfairly, one could stand tall, remain calm, and let truth do its work. And so, Angela rested that night with peace in her heart. She had faced humiliation, but she had answered it with strength. She had faced arrogance, but she had answered it with truth. And in the end, she had shown that dignity could never be taken, it could only be tested. The case was closed, but the lesson lived on.ng arrived, and the courthouse was more crowded than usual. Word had spread quickly about what had happened. People wanted to see with their own eyes the case where two police officers were facing the very judge they had once arrested. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Some came out of curiosity, others out of respect, and many out of a deep sense that they were witnessing something important. Angela arrived early, as she always did. She walked through the courthouse halls with her usual grace, her face calm and unreadable. Though many eyes followed her, she carried herself with steady confidence. She was not there for a show. She was there for the truth. The officers, on the other hand, entered the building looking different from before. Gone was the bold stride, the smug expression. Their shoulders were heavy, and their eyes carried worry. They could feel the weight of the room turning against them. Their story, once spoken with confidence, now seemed fragile. They knew the evidence had exposed much already, but today, more would come. When the session began, Angela took her place at the bench. The court rose, then settled into silence. The lawyers presented further evidence. Witnesses were called, including a passerby who had seen the arrest. The witness described how Angela had calmly followed the officer's instructions and how it seemed unnecessary for her to be handcuffed. His words matched the video evidence, leaving little doubt about what had really happened. Angela listened attentively, never interrupting, never showing personal satisfaction. Her face remained steady, her questions precise. Each step of the process revealed more truth, and each piece of truth weakened the officer's defense. The prosecution then brought forward the officer's own body cam footage, this time highlighting the sections where their voices could be clearly heard. The courtroom listened as the officers spoke to Angela in tones that were sharp, dismissive, and unprofessional. The contrast between Angela's polite, calm replies and the officer's unnecessary hostility could not be ignored. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Murmurs spread among those watching. It became clear to everyone that Angela had been treated unfairly, not because of her actions, but because of the assumptions made against her. Angela allowed the evidence to play out fully. She made sure the officers were given every chance to respond, every opportunity to present their side. That was the kind of judge she was, fair, even when fairness had not been shown to her. When it was time for the officers to speak again, their words faltered even more than the day before. They tried to explain why they had arrested her, but their reasons grew weaker with every sentence. They claimed they had suspicions, but when asked what those suspicions were based on, their answers had no depth. They could not point to anything real. Angela leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but strong. She asked them questions that cut to the heart of the matter. Did she follow your instructions? Yes. Did she present valid documents? Yes. Was there any sign of danger or threat? No. Then what, exactly, justified the arrest? The silence after that question was heavy. The officers shifted in their seats, unable to answer. The courtroom waited, but no reply came that could stand against the truth. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her steady tone carried more weight than any outburst could. The officers lowered their eyes, the reality of their situation sinking deeper. By midday, the case had unraveled completely for them. The evidence showed misconduct. Their words revealed inconsistency. Their actions had no legal foundation. They had used their position not to uphold justice, but to exercise control without reason. Angela announced a short break before continuing with the final statements. As the courtroom emptied for recess, people spoke in low but excited voices. Some admired Angela's patience. Others felt relief to see justice working in plain sight. A few even expressed anger at how such behavior from officers could have gone unchecked if not for the unusual twist of fate that revealed the truth. During the break, Angela sat quietly in her chambers. She thought about what had unfolded. She remembered the night of her arrest, how she had sat silently in the back of the police car, enduring the humiliation. Now she saw those same men struggling to defend their actions under the light of truth. She felt no joy in their downfall. Instead, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. The courtroom was not a stage for revenge. It was a place where the law had to shine clearly, without bias. When the session resumed, Angela returned to the bench. The officers looked tired, their earlier confidence completely gone. They knew the outcome was slipping from their hands. The lawyers gave their closing statements. The prosecution spoke firmly, laying out the facts: an unjust arrest, misuse of authority, false charges. The defense tried to argue, but their words carried little weight after all that had been revealed. Angela listened to every word, her face calm. When the lawyers finished, the courtroom grew still. It was now her turn. She spoke clearly, her voice echoing across the room. She summarized the facts, pointing out the evidence that could not be denied. She reminded everyone present that the law was not a tool for personal power but a shield for fairness. She emphasized that authority carried responsibility, and when that responsibility was broken, trust was broken with it. The officers sat with their heads low as she spoke. Their arrogance had vanished. In its place was the reality of accountability. Angela did not declare the final judgment yet that would come the following day. Instead, she closed the session by reminding the court that justice required patience, evidence, and truth. Her words carried weight not just for the case at hand but for everyone who listened. As people left the courtroom, the story spread even further. Some said they would never forget the look on the officers' faces when they realized who Angela was. Others said they admired her strength, not for revealing her position, but for the way she carried herself with calmness, fairness, and dignity. The officers walked out slowly, avoiding the eyes of the crowd. They had entered this case believing they could control it. Now, they walked into uncertainty, their careers and reputations hanging by a thread. Angela, meanwhile, remained composed. She knew tomorrow would bring the final step. The truth had been shown, but justice still had to be served fully. That night, as she returned home, she sat in silence once more. She thought of all the people who faced situations like hers without the power or position to fight back. She thought of how important it was to stand strong, not only for herself but for those who could not. Tomorrow, she would deliver her final ruling. Tomorrow, the lesson would be complete. And tomorrow, the balance of justice would be restored. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a quiet weight in the air. Angela woke early, her mind clear and focused. She dressed in simple, neat clothes, not the black robe of her profession. Today, she wanted to appear like any other person facing charges. She wanted the process to unfold as naturally as possible before the truth revealed itself. She gathered her papers, placed them in her bag, and walked out the door. The streets were already busy with the daily rush. People hurried to work, children walked to school, and life carried on as usual. No one could guess that Angela was heading to a courtroom where the tables of justice were about to turn in a way no one expected. When she arrived at the courthouse, she walked through the familiar halls. These were the same walls she had walked for years as a judge. Today, she walked them as a defendant. The irony was not lost on her. She smiled slightly, keeping her composure. The security guard at the entrance greeted her politely, unaware of why she was there. Angela nodded and continued toward the courtroom where her hearing would take place. Inside, the room slowly filled with people. Lawyers arranged their notes, clerks set up files, and a few observers whispered quietly in the back rows. It was a normal day in court, but something unusual was about to happen. The two officers entered confidently, their shoulders straight, their faces filled with the same smugness they had shown the night of the arrest. They looked around casually, not even noticing Angela sitting quietly at the front. They had no idea who she really was. The proceedings began. The judge presiding over the case had not yet entered the room. For the moment, everyone was simply waiting. Angela sat calmly, her eyes forward, her hands resting lightly on the table. The officers whispered to each other, occasionally glancing at her with a faint smile, as if certain she would soon face embarrassment. They believed the system was on their side. They believed their reports and their badges would outweigh her voice. Then, the bailiff's voice rang out clearly, "All rise." Everyone stood as the presiding judge entered. But this time, instead of another figure in a black robe walking in, it was Angela herself who rose from her seat. The room froze in shock. The officers blinked in disbelief, their faces draining of color. The very woman they had arrested, mocked, and dismissed now walked with steady grace to the judge's bench. She did not hurry. She did not gloat. She simply carried herself with quiet authority, as she always had. The entire courtroom was silent. Angela took her seat behind the bench, adjusted her robe that had been waiting for her there, and looked over the courtroom with calm, steady eyes. For a brief moment, her gaze rested on the officers. They shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence melting away. They now stood as defendants in her court, though they had not yet realized just how completely the power had shifted. The irony was heavy. Just weeks before, they had handcuffed her on the side of the road, treating her like someone unworthy of dignity. Now, they stood before her, forced to address her with respect. The room itself seemed to breathe differently, the very walls holding the weight of the moment. Angela began the proceedings with professionalism. Her voice was calm, her words precise. She addressed the case without a hint of personal emotion. She did not raise her voice, nor did she show anger. She followed every legal step, giving the officers the same fairness they had denied her. Her control over the courtroom was complete, yet her demeanor was not harsh. It was simply steady, a reminder that justice was not about vengeance, it was about truth. The evidence began to unfold. The prosecution presented the officers' own reports, and Angela listened carefully as they were read aloud. The words sounded weak under the weight of the courtroom. Their claims of suspicious driving and failure to signal had no strong proof. The officers shifted in their seats, their confidence fading with every passing moment. Then, the defense presented video evidence. Body cam footage played for the court, showing Angela's calm compliance the night of the arrest. The video revealed her signaling properly, following instructions, and remaining polite throughout the encounter. The officers' voices on the recording, sharp and dismissive, cut through the silence of the courtroom. Each word they had spoken that night now echoed against them. The observers in the courtroom exchanged glances. Some shook their heads, others whispered quietly. It was becoming clear to everyone that the charges had no foundation. Angela kept her expression neutral. She did not smile, even as the evidence began to dismantle the false accusations against her. She did not show satisfaction as the officers grew more uneasy. Her role was to remain above personal feelings, to ensure the process was fair, even for those who had been unfair to her. That was her strength, her refusal to let emotion cloud justice. When it was time for the officers to speak, their words faltered. They stumbled through explanations, their voices less certain than before. They tried to defend their actions, but the more they spoke, the more their contradictions showed. The courtroom watched as their earlier arrogance turned into nervous attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Angela listened with patience, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Every so often, she asked a precise question, her voice calm but firm. Each question cut deeper into their defense, exposing flaws they could not hide. The officers avoided her gaze, unable to meet the steady eyes of the woman they had once tried to humiliate. By the end of the day, the balance of power was clear. The evidence stood against them. The truth had surfaced, undeniable and sharp. The officers no longer looked confident. Their shoulders had sunk, their eyes darting nervously, their earlier smirks gone completely. Angela closed the session for the day with the same professionalism she had shown throughout. She did not declare victory, nor did she give any hint of personal satisfaction. She simply announced the next steps in the case, her voice carrying the weight of authority and fairness. As the courtroom emptied, whispers filled the air. People could not stop talking about what they had just witnessed. A woman unjustly arrested had revealed herself to be the very judge presiding over the case. It was a story that would spread far beyond those walls. It was a lesson in patience, dignity, and the quiet strength of truth. The officers walked out slowly, their heads down, their earlier arrogance now replaced with worry. They knew their actions had caught up with them. They knew the judge they had underestimated now held the power to deliver justice in its truest form. Angela remained seated a moment longer after the room emptied. She looked around the courtroom, her heart steady. This was not about revenge. It was about the law working as it should. She had been tested, humiliated, and underestimated, but in the end, the truth had spoken louder than any false report. She stood, removed her robe, and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring the next step. Justice was not complete yet, but the path toward it had been firmly set. And as she walked out of the courtroom, her head held high, the quiet dignity she carried with her shone brighter than ever. Angela was not just any ordinary woman who had been stopped without cause. She was a judge who believed deeply in the power of fairness and truth. That night had shaken her, not because she doubted herself, but because it reminded her how easily power could be misused. She thought about the countless people who did not have her knowledge of the law, who might not know how to respond in such a situation, who might feel completely powerless. That thought hurt her more than her own experience. The following day, she went about her work as usual. She dressed in her professional attire, carried her files, and walked into the courthouse with the same calm grace she always had. No one there knew what had happened the night before. She did not tell her colleagues. She did not let her emotions show. Her composure remained her shield. Yet deep inside, she carried the weight of the humiliation she had endured, and she also carried a quiet determination. Meanwhile, the officers who had arrested her filed their reports with confidence. They wrote details that were not true, shaping the incident to fit their version of the story. To them, it was routine. They believed their words would carry more weight than hers. They believed she was just another person who would not fight back. Angela, however, knew the law inside and out. She knew how their false reports would eventually collapse under scrutiny. But she also knew it was not her place, at least not yet, to reveal her identity. She wanted the process to unfold naturally. She wanted the truth to expose itself in the right setting inside a courtroom, under the rules of justice. Days turned into weeks, and the case made its way through the system. Angela received the official notice of her own court date. She read the paper with a faint smile, almost ironic. The very system she had dedicated her life to was now being turned against her by two men who thought they held all the control. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her files, preparing herself for the day that would soon come. While she waited for her case to proceed, Angela carried on with her usual work as a judge. She listened to cases, gave fair rulings, and reminded herself daily of the responsibility she held. Each time she looked at the people who stood before her, some accused, some victims, some witnesses, she thought of how she had felt that night in the police car. vulnerable, misjudged, treated without dignity. That experience sharpened her sense of empathy. It made her even more determined to ensure no one left her courtroom feeling unheard or dismissed. At the same time, she kept her silence. Not a word about her arrest left her lips. She let her work speak for her. To her colleagues, she remained the same professional, reliable, and respected judge. But inside, she waited patiently. The officers had no idea what was coming. Back at the police department, the two officers discussed the arrest as if it was nothing significant. They spoke about her with mocking tones, confident that they had done their job. They did not expect any consequences. To them, she was just another name on their paperwork. But a few people around them noticed their arrogance. One clerk at the department quietly shook his head as he read the report. He had seen enough cases to know when words didn't line up with reality. He noticed how vague and inconsistent the report was, but he said nothing. After all, he had no power to challenge officers directly. Still, the unease in his eyes hinted that the truth would eventually surface. Angela, at home, prepared herself for the coming day. She reviewed the charges with precision. She thought about how the officers would stand in court, confident at first, believing their story would hold. She imagined their surprise when the truth unfolded. She did not want revenge. What she wanted was justice, not just for herself but for every person who had been mistreated in the shadows of authority. The night before her scheduled appearance, Angela reflected again. She sat at her desk with a single lamp casting light on her papers. She thought about her parents, who had always taught her to face hardship with dignity. She thought about the years she spent studying, pushing past barriers, proving herself in spaces where few people looked like her. All of it had prepared her for moments like this, not to respond with anger, but with strength. Her heart was steady. She knew the next day would change everything, not only for her but for the men who had believed they could treat her unfairly. When morning came, she dressed carefully, not in her judge's robe but in modest clothing suitable for a regular citizen appearing in court. She wanted to walk into that courtroom like anyone else accused of something they did not do. She wanted the process to begin naturally, to let the officers carry their confidence a little longer before the moment of truth arrived. On the other side of town, the officers were preparing as well. They felt sure of themselves, rehearsing their statements, reminding each other of the words they had written in their reports. They believed the courtroom would be another easy win. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already shaking. As Angela stepped outside her home, the morning sun touched her face, and she drew in a deep breath. She was not nervous. She was not angry. She was ready. The courthouse was not just a place of work for her. It was her arena, the place where truth and fairness were given life. And soon, that truth would stand taller than the lies written against her. The day of reckoning was near. After a few minutes of checking her papers, the first officer returned. He said she had failed to signal at a turn earlier. Angela knew this was not true. She had been very careful. Still, she replied calmly that she had used her signal, but if they believed otherwise, she respected their authority. She thought this would settle the matter. But the officer did not let it go. His questions became sharper. "Where exactly do you work? What kind of job keeps you out this late?" he asked. Angela answered politely again, saying she worked long hours and was heading home. She did not offer details, because she wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. The officers looked at each other. Something passed between them, a silent decision. Then, without warning, the first officer asked her to step out of the car. Angela felt a wave of disbelief. She had done nothing wrong. Still, she obeyed, unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out. The night air was cool, but her heart was steady. She stood tall, her posture graceful, even though the situation was uncomfortable. One of the officers told her she was being placed under arrest for resisting instructions and driving suspiciously. The words made no sense. She had followed every rule and every instruction. Yet she was being handcuffed. A small group of people passing by slowed to watch. Some whispered to each other, surprised to see a well-dressed woman being treated like a criminal for no clear reason. Angela kept her head high, refusing to show fear. She did not shout or argue. She did not reveal her true identity. She knew very well who she was, someone who worked every day to uphold the law, someone who had sworn to protect justice. The metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. The cold steel bit into her skin. The officers led her toward their car. They spoke to her in harsh tones, warning her not to make trouble. She remained silent. Inside her mind, thoughts were racing. She knew the law. She knew every right she had. She knew this arrest was unjustified. But instead of fighting them on the street, she chose patience. When they placed her in the back of the patrol car, she sat upright, her face calm. Through the glass, she could see her own car parked neatly on the roadside. She thought about how quickly an ordinary drive home had turned into a moment of humiliation. But she also thought about the bigger picture. She had always believed that dignity was not in avoiding struggle, but in how one responded to it. The drive to the station was silent. The officers spoke to each other in low tones, occasionally glancing back at her as though expecting her to break down, to beg, or to protest. But Angela remained composed. She knew they did not recognize her. To them, she was just another woman they thought they could intimidate. At the station, the process was slow and unnecessary. They made her wait. They asked pointless questions, sometimes repeating themselves as if to irritate her. One officer mocked her for being too calm, as though her quiet confidence was a challenge. Another wrote notes with exaggerated pauses, clearly trying to stretch the process. Angela answered every question politely, giving only the necessary information. She did not reveal that she was a judge. She did not say that she had stood in that very courthouse many times before, wearing her robe, delivering justice. She chose silence now, because she knew her moment would come. Inside, she felt both anger and resolve. Anger because she had been treated unfairly for no reason other than assumptions. Resolve because she knew the law was on her side, and when the time came, the truth would reveal itself. Hours passed before they finally told her the charges they were filing. The words sounded weak, even to them. Driving suspiciously. Failure to signal. Resisting instructions. None of these had any proof. Angela listened, nodded politely, and asked if she could call her lawyer. They delayed again, pretending to shuffle papers. But Angela waited. She sat there in the holding area, her wrists free now but her dignity tested. Other people watched her, some curious, some sympathetic. She held her posture straight, her expression calm. Anyone who looked closely could see the strength in her eyes. That night, Angela understood something deeply: injustice was not always about loud acts. Sometimes it was about quiet abuse of power, carried out with confidence because the abusers thought no one could hold them accountable. But she also knew something else: justice has a way of circling back. And when it did, it was unstoppable. By the time they finally processed her release, the officers looked tired but still smug. They thought they had shown their authority. They thought she would carry shame from this night. Angela simply walked out, her head high, her silence stronger than any argument she could have made. She stepped into the cool night again, breathing deeply, already planning her next steps. The officers had no idea who she was. They did not know that the woman they had tried to humiliate was not powerless. They had arrested not just a woman, but someone who would soon sit in judgment over them. And when that day arrived, the balance of power would shift completely.